So briefly, the agenda. So yes, we're going to have a 10-minute presentation from my colleague Jenna about the principles of retrofit and about future-proof, which is a service we offer in this area. Then we're going to hear from Duncan and Larry. We've got short videos to show for both of these householders, and then there'll be a bit of time for them to give you a little bit more information. And after that, we'll move on to a Q&A. We're hoping to wrap up by 7:15. So yeah, so you can all get on with your evenings. Great. Okay. Jenna, I think you're up next. I'll just stop sharing my screen. Are you able to share yours?
Yeah, I will. Just a sec. Hopefully that has worked. Can you see a slide saying low carbon retrofitting?
Not yet.
Not yet.
Still a black screen at the moment. I can now. Yes.
Cool.
We can see your notes, by the way.
Can you see? Mine says no notes. That's weird.
If you just hit the display settings button at the top there, that's it, and then swap that one. It should allow. Is that
excellent?
Better?
Yes,
okay.
Perfect.
Okay, thank you. Great. So yeah, I'm going to talk a bit about low carbon retrofitting, taking a whole house approach, which is the kind of best practice way of thinking about retrofitting. And that's kind of come from retrofit schemes which have taken a bit of a piecemeal approach to retrofit, so just putting in one measure, and that's kind of sometimes had unintended consequences. So taking a whole house approach is a different way of looking at things, so that you look at your home as a whole. But anyway, more on that in a moment. So I'm going to go through what the whole house approach is, and sort of connected with that is a fabric first approach. I'm going to talk about a little bit about how to understand your home, just some general principles about how you can understand your home, because as Vic mentioned earlier, each home is different, and some of the things that we talk about this evening, it's important to make sure that you understand your home properly. I'll talk a bit about funding and how to find contractors and some advice online. And I have, on the next point, I've missed out the I, so how to get some in-depth retrofit advice. So I'll talk about our future-proof project here at CSE. Why do we need more energy efficient homes? So yeah, quite a big percentage of the total UK emissions is from household energy usage, so 14%, which is apparently equivalent to emissions from all UK aviation and waste combined. The UK also has some of the worst performing housing stock in Europe. So 45% of existing homes are rated at Energy Performance Certificate Band D, and 19% are rated as E or lower. And also another quite stark fact, which is approximately 80% of all buildings that will be in use in 2050 have already been built today. So it's just really important that we make sure that our current housing stock is improved so that we can meet net zero. It's all very well bringing in building regulations like new buildings, but if we don't tackle existing buildings, then we're never going to get anywhere near where we need to get. So that's what we mean when we talk about retrofit, is retrofitting a home so that it becomes more energy efficient. So the whole house approach, sort of mentioned this earlier, this is an approach to retrofit rather than looking at measures individually. You take an approach where you should look at your house as a whole, and that's considering it as a system. So looking at who lives in it, where it is, whether it's exposed, whether it's in an area that's prone to flooding, whether you might be at risk of radon, looking at the building services, whether it's got gas, for example, and also sort of looking at whether other things might need to be done first before looking at putting in some fancy new energy efficiency measures. So what's really important is looking at maintenance and any repairs issues before you start putting insulation on the solar panels on the roof. You need to make sure that the roof is in a decent enough state to be able to take them, for example. Taking this approach can help you to decide the order in which to carry out improvements as well, and also thinking about how measures will interact with one another. So if you're putting in more than one measure, thinking about how that would impact on other measures that you might be doing at the same time, or that you might want to do in the future. So an example being, if you've got old windows and you're thinking about putting insulation onto the walls, it would make sense to replace the windows first, because it's much more difficult to replace them once you've put insulation onto the walls. And also, when you think about your house as a whole system, you also think about the way that moisture and air moves around your home, which is really important when you're improving the insulation and the air tightness, to make sure that the ventilation is improved as well. A lot of problems are caused by homes not being adequately ventilated. So that's really important to look at that as part of this whole package. As I said, connected to the whole house approach, best practice is taking a fabric first approach. So that means prioritising improvements to the fabric of the building, so the external shell, before you look at putting in renewables or changing the heating or hot water. So the three main principles being, you want to achieve an even all-round insulation so that there's a consistent temperature on all of the surfaces. So what quite often happens is, if people have an extension added sometime after the original house was built, but the original house has still got cold walls, then that can lead to problems where the sort of moisture tends to settle on the walls of the older part of the property. So yeah, the aim really is to achieve walls that are all the same, so that you don't have any areas where the walls are colder than others. And creating as much as possible an airtight building envelope, so that you've got a continuous unbroken air barrier, and then putting back into it ventilation that's controlled rather than uncontrolled, so air sort of leaking out between cracks where you don't want it to. And then also thinking about the construction being vapor permeable. That's particularly important in older homes. I know that's not the focus of the webinar today, but it is important in all homes as well, to a lesser extent in more modern homes. So understanding your home, one of the first, whether it is traditional or modern, because this really affects the way that well, it dictates all sorts of things about the home. So the kinds of materials that it's made from, and the way that the air and moisture is designed to move around it. So it's a very crude distinction, but we do distinguish between traditional and modern homes. And the general cut-off point for this is 1919. So any home that was considered to be traditional and built after that date is considered to be modern. So some of you probably know, throughout the 20th century, building regulations were developed and sort of gradually tightened up over time, and lots of new materials were discovered and started to be used. And gradually over time, houses became much more airtight, and the kinds of materials that were used were not really vapor permeable, whereas with older houses, the kinds of materials that we use were more likely to be sort of natural, and they allowed the problems often occur when older houses have had changes made to them which have affected the way that moisture moves in and out of the walls. So, for example, like an older stone or brick wall, which might have had some cement-based render or plaster added to it, and that can cause all sorts of problems when moisture gets into the wall. Anyway, there's a lot to say about that subject, so I won't go on about that too much. But yeah, also thinking about whether your home is in a conservation area. It's unlikely to be the case if your home was built in the 60s or 70s, but if it's older than that, then that's going to have a profound impact on the changes that you can make. Funding. So this is some non-means tested, so as in available to anyone funding. The summary is that there's not all that much, but there is something called the Boiler Upgrade Scheme, which started in April, that replaced the Renewable Heat Incentive, which you might have heard of. This is an upfront grant of £5,000 for an air source heat pump. Sorry, I've got that acronym there. Or a biomass boiler, or £6,000 for a ground source heat pump. There's just a few more details there. There's not much of that money available. So I'd say if you're interested in it, get in there quickly, because it's not going to be around for long. There's also something called the Smart Export Guarantee, which is a bit of money that you can make from solar panels which generate electricity. That's payment from an electricity supplier for electricity you generate on site that you don't use. And also some local authorities have low interest loans for energy efficiency. So there's one in the southwest called Lendology. So that's really worth checking out as well. I'd just quickly talk about means tested funding. So this is for people who are on a low income. As I've said, their eligibility is complicated, so give us a call if you want more advice. Generally speaking, you need to be on a low income, which is below 30k as a household. There's sometimes saving limits as well. And you might also sometimes need some sort of health criteria, but there's some of the main funding schemes there. So the Home Upgrade Grant Scheme, or HUGS, which is money from central government, that's local authority led scheme. So the local authority in your area may be running a scheme like this, so it's definitely worth checking that out if you think you might be eligible. There's also eco funding, which is money from energy suppliers. And then I just thought I'd mention that SSEN, who are electricity, they also have some funding available to enable energy efficiency works. But yeah, as I say, if you're interested at all in any of that, just give us a ring and we can talk you through all of it. I just thought I'd give some tips on how to find contractors, because that's a question we get asked a lot. I think that the best place to start is the Trustmark website. So the Trustmark have a list of trusted installers and builders who've gone through a certain accreditation process to become registered with them. And also in terms of insulation work and renewables, the National Insulation Association is a way to find installers for insulation who are certified. And also if you're getting any renewables installed, so any solar panels or a heat pump, then really do need to make sure that they're registered with the microgeneration certification scheme, and you can have a look on their website for an installer. We've also got loads of resources on our website, on the CSE website. It's just a selection here. And there's like workbooks as well for you to sort of work through if you've got an older home. So yeah, loads of resources to check out there. There's also a list of some other useful resources, and I'm sure we can share these with you rather than you having to scribble them down. But these are some resources that I use. Lots of really useful stuff on there. And then I'm going to mention a bit about Future Proof. So this is a project that we run here at CSE. It was originally funded from the central government, but that funding ended last year. So we do now have to charge for our services, although we've got some discounts available in some areas, depending on where you live. So we can offer you advice over the phone and send you out a written report, or what's more popular is where we go out and visit you at home and do a full survey and produce a plan for you. And there's an example of that you can see on our website. We can also offer some project management stuff if you're interested in that, and some referrals to installers and contact details for builders. And we cover basically the Wacker area, but also Swindon and Wiltshire. And that's the website and the email and our phone number at the bottom there. If you're not in any of those areas, then there are other organisations offering something similar. These are just a few examples. If you don't live in any of those areas, then yeah, just have a good Google around. There may well be like a charity like CSE in your area that offers something like Future Proof. So yeah, that's it. There's my contact details, and there's both of our websites. So yeah, that's me done.
Perfect. Thanks, Jenna. Excellent. Great. So I am just going to share my screen. Thanks. Yeah, thanks again, Jenna. So that's great. Some of the overview of what everybody should think about for retrofit. We're going to move on to a presentation from one of our homeowners now, from Duncan. So we're going to start by showing a video. So bear with me while I just line up the video. Hopefully this will work okay. It depending on your personal internet connections, it may buffer a little or be a little bit blurry. If that's the case, just bear with us, and we will share the links to the videos afterwards.
My name is Duncan Finlayson. I live in Limpleystoke, which is a small village just south of Bath. We have a house that was built in 1960. It was built as a bungalow and then extended into the roof. We installed an air source heat pump and also solar voltaic panels. And we have a system which is linked so that we can also charge an electric car from the solar or whatever other power is available. Our motivation was purely and simply to reduce our carbon emissions. It does mean, though, in the present circumstances where energy costs have increased, but gas and oil costs have increased more than electricity, that we will also be saving money. This is the outside unit for the air source heat pump. It's a Mitsubishi Ekodan. I believe that our supplier chose it because our system has two parts to it, underfloor heating and radiators. There is pipework here which takes the heated water via the wall here and up into a loft where we have all the control systems, and this is a beautiful piece of cladding. And this room actually has two kinds of underfloor heating. There is a suspended floor here which has insulation laid between the joists, and then the underfloor heating on top of it. And then that part there is a solid floor. We have 10 solar panels. They're what's called in-roof panels because we had our roof taken up and relaid, so we could do that. It makes them much more attractive and also easier to keep clean. Our orientation is not ideal, so we've actually got panels on 4 roofs, but we do get a reasonable spread through the day. Well, I did quite a lot of internet research. I talked to potential contractors. I looked at what government grant schemes were available and came to it through that. We received the renewable heat incentive, which is £7,700, and we had a grant of £350 towards the cost of the electric vehicle charging point. Well, the key thing is to find good suppliers. Obviously, we think to some extent that we're pioneers, so we do tend to bore our friends and neighbours with the details of the system, but people are interested, and we have a local village group who are trying to promote knowledge of this kind of a system and retrofitting.
Excellent. Thanks, thanks, Duncan, for allowing us to film your home, and my colleague Charlotte, who's on the call, who produced those films. Hopefully that gave you a little picture of the measures Duncan has taken, but he's here to add some more to that. Yeah, Duncan, do you want to make any additional comments, and let me know if you want the other slides to be shown?
Yes, if you could just put up the first of the three slides.
Yes.
I just wanted to show you that even with current proprietary systems, you can get a lot of information about where energy is flowing in your home. So this is attached to the solar panels, but it tells you that in this particular case that energy is flowing from the solar panels. A small amount of it is going into the house. Most of it is going to the electric car in this particular case. None is going to the hot water tank because it's been switched off, and thankfully nothing is going back into the grid. Can you show the next slide then? If you click on any of the elements of that screen that was just shown, then you can get, over various timescales, you can get a much more detailed picture of how energy is flowing through this particular part of the system. So this is what energy the home itself is using over a 1 week period. And the next one, Vic. And this is what's happening in terms of, oops, lost it. That's it, of import and export from the grid. It's very difficult to make sure that you use absolutely all of your solar in the summer, because you've got the juxtaposition of two things: maximum solar output and minimum use in the house. So it can be quite a trick. And in fact, one of the questions that you sent was, do you micromanage your use of electricity depending on the sunshine? And the answer is not really, but for EV charging, yes, because that's the way to try and make sure that you don't put electricity back into the grid. Obviously, you can be on the smart energy, whatever it's called, but the amount of money that you get for it is very small at the moment. With most suppliers, it's about 4p. You did send some other questions. Do you want me to say anything about any of those, Vic?
Yes, go ahead. Yeah.
Okay.
Comment.
So what permissions did we require? No planning permission. If you Google planning portal air source heat pump, there's a very good description of what's needed. There are various conditions. You have to be no nearer than 1 meter to a boundary, and we actually are in a conservation area, so it can't be at the front of the house. But that's very straightforward. DNO permission, this is to do with getting permission to put electricity back into the grid, and also they need to check the power ratings of various things, because an air source heat pump is quite a high instantaneous power. But that was organised by the contractors, so it wasn't a problem. Have we had any issues with condensation? No. I mean, the house has been through a sort of period of upgrade over the years. So, you know, the first proper double glazing was put in 2004, and so on and so on. Fortunately, we have extended, but we've not encountered any of the problems that Jenna was talking about. in terms of the heating inside, we have part of our system which is residual radiators, and we had to make a very small change to that. But I don't think this would necessarily be typical. I know that in some houses, if you rely on your radiator system, you have to make quite big changes. I don't know whether Larry's going to talk about that. I can talk a bit about costs, but is that enough time from me?
Yeah. Let's leave it there, and then if people want to specifically ask more about costs, we can do later in the Q&A.
Okay.
Great, thanks, Duncan. Yeah, there's loads of stuff to cover. So if we move on to Larry's wrong button. We move on to Larry's home now. So I'll just jump straight into the video, and then we can yeah, and then we'll discuss it. Let me just share my screen. Oh.
Hello, I'm Laurence, and this is my house. It's a detached house in the early 1970s. Make my house net zero carbon. And I've introduced a few measures in the house, and I'll list them through. The first is photovoltaics on the roof, and I've put a 7 kilowatt array on the roof. I've put a heat pump in and got rid of gas in the house. I've put some smart controllers for the heating, a thermal store for the hot water, and finally I have an electric car that is a vehicle to home electric car, so I can supply my house from the energy stored in the car. So I've installed a air to water heat pump, and this is done so I can get rid of gas in the house. Now the air to water heat pump does both my heating and heats up the radiators in the house, and also provides hot water to the hot water tank. Now the heat pump I put here because of acoustic reasons, because it's away from a neighbour's openable window, and when you locate it you do need to be careful about where it is to a neighbour's or your windows, because they do make noise. Now I haven't done particularly well here. I've had some problems. You can see that it's mounted on the wall, and what's happened is that the heat pump does generate some vibrations, and that's gone into the house. I've put in some anti-vibration mounts to try and dampen that, but if you can avoid it in the first place, try to get it mounted on the ground and away from yours and neighbours' windows. So I have an electric car for about 5 years now, and the benefit of this electric car was one of the first cars that could both put out electricity in, and also you can take electricity out. And I have here a vehicle to grid charger here. And this charger here was one of the first few that were available. It is a bit big, and because it's still an experimental device, but has become a lot more mature now. So this allows me, and I will just show you, to plug in like you normally would to charge an electric car. But this does something slightly different. It will charge the car from my solar panels, and also if there isn't sun, it will take the energy from the car and play it back to the house. And what that does is it means when electricity is expensive or high in carbon, you can stop using grid electricity and use your stored cheap low carbon energy that's generated on your house. One of the really valuable things I was able to do, and didn't cost too much, was to install a whole house smart heating system. The system I have is a Tado system, and this allows me to control each one of the rooms using a smart thermostat to the temperature that I want. Things it does is look at the weather ahead and then predict whether it's going to be cold or sunny, and understand whether your house warms up quickly or not. It allows you to control things, each room individually. I found that the choice of which to do first was quite a difficult one, but I worked with the things I wanted to do in the house. Is that things like installing the heat pump was going to be the most disruptive, and in fact it caused the biggest problems for us. Changing all the radiators, putting in a big storage tank, and of course putting a big fairly noisy box on the outside of the house is one that you have to plan in with what you want to do in the rest of the house. So I tried to take advantage of the funding that I had, and I tried to make the right economic decision for each of the technologies I put in. The first ones were easy ones. Paying for installation and saving energy that way was an easy win and a logical one to do, and relatively low cost. Then I did the smart heating system. Again, low cost, easy wins. The bigger ones were more of a challenge. The solar panels, I knew at the time when I had some other work going on, putting the solar panels on was the right thing to do. And you can see immediate effect with those. The hardest one was the heat pump. I was lucky enough to take advantage of the RHI, which allowed me to get about 60 or 70% of the funding back over the next 7 years. Everybody has to look at their own home in a case-by-case basis. If your boiler's coming to the end of its life, think long and hard, get quotes, do your research to make a decision on whether it's the right thing to do at the time. Speak to other people, go online, use the brilliant YouTube advice that is available out there to make the right decision for you.
Excellent, thanks, Larry. Great. Did you want to feel free to make any additional comments. I'll just get your slides up.
Okay, yeah, I can come on to the slides. I will try to answer first the questions. I did notice there were some questions over the noise. So I've heard different heat pumps, and I've heard them, and they are there's a light fan noise, and they are ultra quiet. I've not had a lot of luck. I think mine is particularly noisy. The compressor is particularly noisy, and that's what's causing some issues for me. I'm still trying to resolve that, I think. And also that, on top of that, I hadn't got the space in my back garden to be able to put it. So I ended up having to put it on the wall. And that's where the noise from the compressor inside it has caused me some problems. So it's certainly worth watching out for that. In my view, if you are going for a manufacturer, ask them to explain, or give them the manufacturer's one, have a look at the data, you can look at that, or find an example of one and actually listen to it when it's working hard. Because when it's warm and it's just doing a little bit of light work, it can be quite quiet. But if it's working hard and it's really cold, that's when you tend to notice the noise from them. The only thing I was going to share was a couple of slides, if you want to stick those up, Vic, and I can answer some of the sort of the questions, which I'll talk about costs very quickly. So I installed, it's called Emporium. It's an energy monitor system that allows me to actually monitor all of the circuits on the house. And I'll explain very quickly. You can see there that the solar generation is the orange line, and that's sort of negative, i.e. it's the generation from it. The brown line is my house and the various demands on the house going across the day. So you've got sort of midnight on the left and midnight the next day, and then you can see what happens is that the vehicle to grid sort of charges itself and then discharges itself depending on what's happening at the charger at the time. And the red line is the resultant power from my house. And because I've not bought a battery, I've used the car. the car itself has got an enormous battery in it, and if I wanted to use everything, all of it, it would keep me going for 3 or 4 days of energy, certainly during the spring and autumn, and I don't need any energy if the car is during the day if the car's plugged in. I think the next slide was just showing the detail. One of the I found was really helpful was the little monitoring system allowed me to monitor each one of the circuits if I wanted to, so I could see what the lighting was doing, what the kitchen was doing, what the, I don't know, whatever other bits and pieces that I had in the house, which I found was quite useful. The only thing I was going to explain is I had to, for my heat pump, I had to change all the radiators. Which made it more expensive. My radiators were old and they were rusty and they needed changing, and they had to be made quite big. So watch out for that. The radiators can be made quite big for some people. It depends on your house, certainly for mine. I also had to have a tank installed and quite a lot of other modifications done. And I share that my heat pump cost me, wait for it, £13,000. So it was a really expensive installation. I got just under £9,000 of that back via the, or will do over the period of RHI. Obviously, at the moment, you will only get £5,000 or a little more, depending on whether it's air source. And I had a 7.2 kilowatt solar, and that cost me £5,000. So it's expensive, but I will say at the moment, my bill for all of my electricity, all of my transport, my petrol costs, all of my heating and my hot water is sitting down about sort of £30–40 a month. And Excellent. I've got a 4-bedroom detached.
Great, thanks, Larry. That's a really, thank you both for your an oversight of your home, overview of your homes. Just going to share 1 or 2 slides about this the programme of running. So just to say, we've got another webinar coming up on the 23rd of June, and that's going to be looking at 2 detached homes from the 1920s and 1930s with solid wall insulation, air source heat pumps, solar, etc. We've also already had 1 webinar that was looking at an 1800 stone cottage and a 1900 stone house, rural homes. So the recordings of all of these webinars will be made available at the end of this series, so probably in early July, and we'll send an email to everybody who registered for an Eventbrite alerting you when they are available. And just for those of you who are local to Bristol, or if you have friends or family who are, we'll be holding an information stall on Saturday the 25th of June at Future Leap on Gloucester Road. It's the old Maplins buildings for people that are local to there, and we'll be able to signpost people to advice for those. We'll put that link in the chat because it's before we'll send out the email. But yeah, perhaps Charlotte, you could put that link in the chat. Okay, we are going to open up to questions now. So yeah, Charlotte, I'll hand over to you.
Thanks, Vic. Yeah, so I've just been having a look through the chat as we've been going along, and there were some questions about your home, Larry, if you're happy to answer those ones.
So, if you tell me which one, I've seen a few there. So
yeah, of course. So the first one was which model of heat pump did you install? So
LG is mine. It's called a Therma V. And it was a 9 kilowatt unit for mine. So it's the largest they do for what they call a single phase supply, which can get off a domestic power supply. The bigger ones can cost a lot bigger, so they double up in size for the LG one.
Thank you. And then there is one about the reduction in car battery life by using it to power your home. Is that something that you're worried about?
Okay, so my car, I monitor this quite carefully because I'm using the battery. There has actually just been a study that's released that was done by Nottingham University, I think, that looked at the degradation on batteries. It's proven to actually help them. So gentle cycling of a car battery can actually help it and not degrade it. rather than someone who might just leave it 100% all the time or leave it very low kind of thing. My car is now, it's not that old. This one is my second electric car. This one's about 2 years old, and the battery's about 97% at the moment. So still pretty good, very little degradation. In fact, there's none seen on it at all, to be honest. It's normal.
And I'm not sure if you would know the answer to this one, but they were just asking, is the vehicle to home charging available across the southwest?
So vehicle to home is a bit of a trial, but it's starting to become a bit more available, and I think it should become a lot more available because batteries are really expensive in the home. And if we are all going to be driving electric cars, it'd be great to see it. It is a bit. There's only you can actually now buy a unit. Commercially, the first one in the UK has just become available, but they are very expensive at the moment. They're about £5,000 each because they're very early on. So you might want to hang on to the prices come down. There are about 2-3 companies that make them at the moment, but only one of them sells them outside of a trial. Mine was Indra was the name, and there's another one called Wallbox who are making the other one. But you can put it anywhere. It works. You need approvals for it because you're exporting, but yeah, you can install it and put it anywhere.
Great, thank you. And someone's asking about how you control the heat in each room. Are you doing that remotely?
So for me, I have the Tado system works with like a thermostatic radiator valve, which just you unscrew your normal radiator valve, you screw on this other one, it's got a battery in it, and then it talks to the app, and you can say, I don't want any heat in this room in the bedroom, and that's what it does, and keeps it off during the day if that's what you want to do. And yeah, so it's a matter of just changing the radiator valves in each room, and that was one of the most effective ways. They worked out about £35 each, so they're not that cheap, and about every year you have to change the batteries in them, which is a bit of frustration. But I found it really, really helpful to shut off rooms that you weren't using.
That's great, thank you. And then again, there's a question for both of you, Duncan and Larry, if you have any advice on useful questions to ask an air source heat pump installer before someone gets it done.
Go on, Duncan, you can have a go.
Well, I by far the most important thing is to have an MCS performance estimate, which is in a form that's dictated by the micro generation certification scheme, and lays out all the parameters of how the system is supposed to work and how it compares with your previous system, both in terms of energy use and cost, and get them to take you through it. If they don't provide it, or they feel hesitant about taking you through it, then that, for me, would be a bit of a danger sign. On the other hand, and also ask them about what they provide to you when they hand the system over. The MCS requirement is that they do provide you with a handover document, but these vary quite a lot, I think. And the one that I had from our supplier, who I'm quite happy to name, was really very good. They pulled out information from a lot of different places, and it's all in a PDF. I mean, in days of yore, it would have been in a little book, but now it's in a PDF.
Okay, to me, I would a couple of questions I would ask them. First of all, is because I'm a bit of a didn't work very well for me. I've had some problems with it. Is obviously. Can I listen to one? Have you got one installed nearby that I could listen to, or something else like that? All the data around that, because I have heard some and they are very quiet, and others are not so quiet. The other thing I would suggest though is the warranty, and asking about the warranty on them. So my installer was the warranty effectively isn't provided by him. it's with the manufacturer. So if I am left with a problem, I don't go back through him, I have to go through the manufacturer, which is a downside. Where other installers will offer a warranty as part of the installation, so you can go back to them after 3 or 4 years if you have a problem, which I think is definitely a benefit and something I would consider next time round. I think there was one other thing, but I've forgotten it now.
Charlotte, I can see there's a few questions coming about insulation. Jenna, I wonder if you wanted to jump in and just say anything about the recommendations
Just wrote a
that we have.
response,
Oh
actually.
yeah.
Yeah, I was just trying to say, like, the question about how much insulation you need to have for heat pump we get, there's not like a straightforward answer to it, because it depends on lots of factors, really, sort of specific to your home. It's not just about insulation, it's also about sort of whether the property's attached or not as well. Like, that makes quite a big difference, and it kind of depends on who you speak to. So heat pump installers will say any property can have a heat pump, it just depends on the size. Some other people would say, well, you know, you've also got to look at running costs, because yeah, that's like a big factor in it as well. Like a really general like rule of thumb to look at is, if you look on your EPC, you can see on there right at the bottom there'll be a figure for your heat demand. So that's in kilowatt hours per year. That was what used to be used to decide how much money you would get under the renewable heat incentive. The upper limit for that was 20,000 kilowatt hours per year. So that's like a really rough rule of thumb, is if it's below that, then a heat pump will probably work for you. But you do need to get like a proper detailed assessment of your home. So the kind of thing that we can do through Futureproof, or also heat pump installers, use some software to do heat loss calculations for your home, and they would be able to give you a more detailed idea of whether a heat pump would work for you.
Can I add something to that?
Go for it.
Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah.
There's a magical thing called COP or SCOP. And the way that heat pump works is that it provides a certain amount of heat energy, partly by putting electrical energy in and partly by extracting energy from the air. And the ratio between the heat energy that comes out and the electrical energy that goes in is called the coefficient of performance. And this is a very important parameter. And one of the things that's been happening over the last 3 or 4 years is that the COPs that are available with commercial systems have improved quite a lot. Now, this means that with the power limit of a domestic supply in a home, that you can actually provide more heat. So this 20,000 kilowatt hours per year is a very good rule of thumb, but it's probably a slightly moving figure. I don't know if you want to add to that, Jenna?
I don't have anything to add to that particularly, I'm afraid.
Okay, I can try and add a little bit to that. So Duncan's absolutely right. A heat pump is a magic box. It moves energy from the outside in. So you put 1 kilowatt of electricity in, you'll get up 3 or 4 kilowatts of heat coming out of it. And that's what makes it really efficient, because you're not generating heat, you're transferring heat, which is the magic about them. And as the technology improves, Tom is right, it's getting better, that efficiency getting better, which means the payback on them should get better, and their ability to beat gas in terms of the cost. I'd say when I had the assessment done, if you have an average a gas boiler, and it's a fairly modern gas boiler, the efficiency the savings not that fantastic, and it would take a long time to pay it back. However, energy prices have gone berserk, as we all know, and if they stay at that level, then the payback will pay for gas quite quickly. If you're on oil or you're running on something else, then absolutely it makes sense. Or you're on bottled gas or anything else like that, it would definitely make sense in my view.
Yeah, thank you. So we've got another question in the chat. and they're asking what the best way to insulate your walls is if it's not appropriate to have cavity wall insulation. Do you have anything to say on that one, Jenna?
So if the home is has a cavity construction, but it's in an exposed area, yeah, it is possible to put, well, some people would put external wall insulation on an empty cavity, but other people think it's a bad idea. It's a tricky one, that actually. There's some people, so sort of best practice is actually to use an injected polyurethane foam in properties like that. So the kind of expanding foam type material, but some people are not keen on that as a product. But it's the reason why that's sort of recommended for those sorts of properties is because, yeah, it is really effective, and you don't tend to get the kind of moisture bridging issues that you get with the more normal kind of cavity wall insulation products. But yeah, it's not particularly straightforward answer.
I had a cavity wall, obviously, in my house, and the previous occupant had filled it, and it was bridging the gap, and it's meant I got damp on the inside. So what I ended up doing is I couldn't put insulation on the outside. That was too expensive, just didn't make financial sense. So I have just put a waterproof but breathable render on the outside, which was cheaper, but at least it stopped. It helps initiation because it dries the wall out effectively, stops the rain coming in because it's got silicone in it, and helped improve the insulation of the wall considerably. And I've noticed the difference quite a lot. And also because it's white, it helps it keep the house cooler as well because it reflects the light. So it's a way around it if you are struggling.
Yeah, great, thank you. There's another question coming through for Duncan and Larry. What is the actual electrical loading of your air source heat pumps?
I'm just typing something on that.
Okay.
So everyone will be different. Mine peaks about 4 kilowatts, 4 to 4 at its maximum. 4 to 4.2 kilowatts is its maximum. Heat pumps can be set at lower levels. So mine has a theoretical output of 9 kilowatts, but the peak input would never go above 4 kilowatts or 4.1 kilowatts, I think it is for mine. I can drop that down, then you can change settings on it to drop it down to just 3 kilowatts if you are worried about overloading your house or there's a constraint on the grid. Because when you put a heat pump in, you do have to get permission from the utility to do so. The DNO, distribution network operator, the people that bring the cables into your house, and in this area it's Western Power, and if their network can't cope, and there are circumstances, certain older houses have a thing called a looped connection, and if you try to put an EV charger in, you can get problems with that. But it can cause you have to make upgrades, so you can reduce it down. But as everyone else has said, it should be a good installer, do the checks, and let you know about these things. So do make sure that they have checked about the utility constraints and they get the right approvals.
Thank you. So we've got another question in the chat asking, are there any effective low carbon or recycled insulation materials for retrofit? For example, wool. Is that anything you know about, Jenna?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there's lots of materials like that. So sheep's wool is often used in loft spaces, but other products that are natural things, and that can be used for lots of different applications. So that can be used on walls, and it can also be used on sort of pitched roofs. Other kinds of natural materials are cork-based insulation, hemp and lime. We can share some links for, well, actually I can share a link in the chat for a supplier of natural building materials. The thing to say is that they do tend to be more expensive than petrochemical based materials, so things like Celotex and Kingspan, that type of product. And with sort of more natural materials, you need to use a thicker depth to achieve the same properties as like a material like Kingspan board. But yeah, you've got the added advantage of it being natural and not based on sort of oil. So yeah, I'll share a link in the chat.
Yeah, perfect. Someone says they have a solid floor with parquet flooring. Any ideas on adding insulation without ripping the floor up?
So this is insulating under the floor, is it?
Yeah. That's
Okay. I didn't insulate under my floors. One, because I have a wooden floor, ground floor, which is ventilated underneath. I was worried about moisture and damp and other such things, and the heat loss was generally is less. I did put some, where I had carpet, put a thicker insulation underlay as I could, the best performing one, and where I had put wooden floor, again I put the best performing, and I think it pays to do things like the best performing sort of insulation above that floor, but underneath it I wasn't going to touch it. I was worried about damp. So certainly if you've got things like parquet floors, you'll need to, if you insulate underneath, you'll have to lift it and put a vapor barrier in, which is often what just stop the moisture becoming a problem.
Yeah, perfect, thank you.
Duncan, so I was just going to say, Duncan, I think you insulated your floor, didn't you? Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Well, what we did was part of a sort of larger extension and redevelopment of the house, and the underfloor heating was a part of that work, and it naturally fell into two kinds: either that laid in an existing suspended floor, although we actually replaced the joists as well, or in a solid floor, and these were then proprietary systems which are constructed with insulation. So it's not really a question of deciding to do the insulation separately. You put in underfloor heating, you need to put in insulation and a vapor barrier, whether it's solid floor or suspended.
Yeah, great, thank you. Yeah, I think if anyone would like to ask a question directly, feel free to pop up your hand, and we can get to that. I think we've got through all of the questions in the chat.
I'd like to ask something of Jenna.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, go ahead.
This question of the formaldehyde foam, we had that done in our house as a top-up because it had been done with blown fibre, probably in the early 90s. And it was clear when we made a hole in a wall that it wasn't that brilliant. So we sort of cast around and we found somebody who provided this formaldehyde foam, and it worked extremely well. But I get the impression that it's not very common to be able to find a supplier who can actually do it. And I just wonder why. What is the problem there if it's so effective? In our particular area, we have a lot of people that we know who have cavity walls which were sort of built in the 1930s, which are too narrow, or where there's too much debris or whatever to install what you might call a conventional thing, but formaldehyde might well work.
I don't actually know. Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I suppose, yeah, because the traditional materials that are used for cavity wall insulation is, well, initially it was blown mineral wool, and now people tend to use the polystyrene beads. But yeah, it's not common at all to find the foam installers. I don't actually know why that is. I think I definitely come across people who sort of distrust it. And I think there's been a few issues that I've heard of with some unscrupulous installers advising people to get it under their rafters in the loft. and like we would really advise against that, particularly if that you've already got your loft insulated at joist level, like at the floor level. You really don't need to get it put under the rafters. But the other issue with that is, depending on the construction of your roof, it could potentially lead to problems with maintenance. So if you need to like replace a roof tile, you might not be able to if you've got this sort of foam stuck to it. So I don't know if that would also be an issue with maintenance in terms of sort of walls. Yeah, I'm not sure.
Thank you. I think Graham has his hand up. Would you like to unmute?
Oh, I have lived by myself, and I live in a semi-detached house, and I have been. I'm having the more double glazing put in and various things, and one of the things that nobody has said anything about, the temperature of the water that these heat pumps produce. I would, if I'm going to have the hot water produced as well as the heating water for the house, then I'm going to want a temperature of about 65 degrees in the middle of winter to keep the house warm enough. And to add to that, you've got small houses nowadays. Mine's 1980s built with a very small bedroom in. I can't increase the size of the radiator, so I would want a heat pump with a much higher temperature than the 45 degrees they talk about. What is the top temperature they have nowadays for the water from these heat pumps?
Duncan, do you want to have a go? I can have a go if you want. I don't mind.
Well, I don't know what top. I know our sorts of heat pump are now being specified at 55 and 60 degrees, with still quite reasonable cots, sort of about 3.4. And I imagine it's improving all the time. I mean, we have a circulation temperature of 50 degrees, which is partly through radiator and partly through underfloor heating. But what we have is we have a link between the solar panels and the hot water cylinder, which means that the solar panels heat the hot water to 10 degrees more than the air source heat pump. And we find that works very well. Mind you, there are only two of us, a retired couple. We don't have any teenage daughters, thankfully. But you know, it seems to work quite well like that.
Okay, for me, I'd say that obviously, for those who don't understand, the higher the temperature you have to have of your hot water, the less efficient the heat pump gets. So the lower you can get it, the more efficient it will be. Hence why they encourage you to put in bigger radiators to get the same heat out in your house. For hot water, it's usually a lot smaller amount of load on an older house, but the heat pump can run for a short period of time and generate. Mine will generate up to about 55, 60 degrees on the hot water. And then if I want it hotter, it will use an electric immersion to top it up to the top. And I can say when I want to do that. I may set it when my solar's happening, or if I have cheap off-peak electricity, if you just get an economy 7 type thing, you could get it to run then. And most heat pumps will do that. But something else that's worth noting is that I don't heat my hot water very high. I keep it actually quite low. I run my tanks around 42, 43 degrees. And I'm a bit of an advocate of that too, because why heat your hot water really hot and then cool it down again? Just heat it to the temperature you need. You do have to, once a week, make sure that you heat your hot water up to really high temperature, 65 to 70, just to disinfect it. And almost all heat pumps will have a setting that's set by your installer to disinfect it afterwards if you want a low temperature. I would add one other thing. I can keep my temperature, flow temperature, and I'm trying it now, right down at sort of 35 degrees. But to do that, I can only warm the rooms. I changed 2 of the radiators and put what they call a fan core unit in, which means it's like a little mini radiator, like a radiator that you get in your car with those little fins, and it has a gentle fan that blows over it. And that allows me to get much more heat out of a compact unit and at lower temperatures. And I found those really effective.
Thank you.
It's worth saying as well, of course, that there's a trade-off between the amount of hot water that you store and the temperature that you store it at. In Larry's case, he must have quite a high volume. We went from a 100-litre hot water tank to a 250-litre hot water tank when we changed to the air source heat pump.
Yeah, we've got a 300-litre hot water tank, but I've got 2 girls who never get out the shower, so I need every litre of that.
Thank you.
I think John has his hand up.
Yes, we've got a Samson heat pump system, and I noticed that particularly in the winter when it first starts up, it's pushing water around the radiators at 48 degrees. But as soon as the return temperature is sensed, it begins to drop that temperature down. So within a couple of hours, the heat pump is circulating water at about 30 degrees. And because we've doubled the 5 of the biggest radiators in the house at the advice of the installer, we have no problem at all with that lower water temperature. So it's not always going to run at the same temperature. I suspect the heat pump is sensing what the return temperature is and adjusts accordingly.
That's a very good point. And also modern heat pumps can run on a system called a compensation curve, which is where the flow temperature rather than the return temperature changes according to the outside temperature. So if the outside temperature is higher, then the primary flow temperature will be lower. And this is all to do with making it more efficient. Because if you can drop the flow temperature, then you get a higher coefficient of performance.
I think Guy had his hand up as well.
Sorry, Guy, did you say?
Yeah, you.
Oh, hi. Yes, hi. Thanks for answering the questions I've asked so far. I just wanted to sort of expand on the question I put in the chat. I'm sort of here on behalf of my mother who's trying to retrofit sort of 70s property. She's gone down. She's trying to manage lots of different changes at once. She's trying to warm up a sort of cold, damp home with a energy rating of F and wants to make it greener as she does it. I was wondering who you'd recommend to effectively sort of coordinate multiple, house system-wide changes. She's gone down the architect, project manager route up till now and's got her fingers burnt. The architect wasn't very innovative or proactive. Who would you recommend does the coordination, particularly for somebody who doesn't feel up to project managing it themselves?
I was just writing out a reply in the chat, Guy. Yeah, it can be really tricky to find people to fulfill this role because there's not really a sort of an official role for this sort of thing. What area did you say your mum lives?
She's in Somerset.
Okay. Well, I mean, we do offer a project management service as part of Future Proof. You could also try looking on the Green Register website. I don't know if you've heard of them. I'll put a link in the chat. So Green Register is a register of sort of built environment professionals, including architects, builders, installers, and also project management types. So it's probably worth having a look on there as well to see if there's anybody that could help. But yeah, I think this sort of thing, I don't know if anyone else wants to have an input, but from what I've heard, it's really just depends on sort of luck and finding a builder or a contractor that is sort of competent and is able to kind of take that role on.
Yeah, in all these cases, it's a case study. Get them to give examples and really challenge them on it. I think that's the best advice I can give when you're trying to find an installer that we're trying to project manage. Where have you done it before? That's really important.
I would hope that expertise is quite rapidly evolving, actually. It's true that we've had not a bad experience because we weren't really expecting it, but we employed an architect who really knew nothing about air source heat pumps. But he's now retrofitting his own home. So by the end of it, he will know a lot, I think.
I think we're running a little bit short on time for questions, but if anyone still has their hand up, do feel free to stay on at the end of the call, and we might be able to answer them then. I just wanted to do one more that's come through in the chat, and it's just what happens in winter. How low can the air source heat pumps work at? Are you able to give any info on that, Jenna?
Different manufacturers do look at different ones. Obviously, the colder it gets, the harder it has to work to extract the heat out of it. My LG one will still output 9 kilowatts at minus 15 degrees ambient temperature. So it still maintains its full output all the way down to minus 15. And I'm in the southwest, and I don't think I've ever had it that cold here.
Thank you. So yeah, I guess we just wanted to give you a little bit of info about how you can stay in contact with us. So if you do have any questions coming up this webinar or about CSE's work in general, feel free to email us at communities@csc.org.uk. And also you can follow us on social media. Our Twitter is @HelloCSE. And do visit our website. We have lots of resources on there that I know Jen's been sharing some of them in the chat as well. So yeah, if you're looking for any more information, I'm gonna hand back to Vic.
Yeah, thanks, Charlotte. A big thank you to both Duncan and Larry for taking the time to participate in this project. We really appreciate it. Yeah, for any of you who've been attending, if you've been inspired to learn more, do visit our website. We have a lot of advice leaflets on all different types of technology, and we also have various projects that we work on. And the Future Proof website, do take a look if you live in the Southwest. There's a really interesting case study there of somebody's whole journey through retrofit to read, so that's really good. So yeah, finally, I just want to say we'd really love to hear any feedback on tonight. When you close your Zoom window, there should be a window will pop up, and you'll just have like four or five questions there. Please do, please do answer that. It just helps us understand who we're reaching and how we're doing. So yeah, I'll leave the chat open for a little bit in case you want to enter any questions that weren't answered. We will try and compile some like FAQs and circulate them to everyone, along with a recording of this webinar and the individual videos of the householders. So yeah, thank you very much, everybody. Thank you for your time tonight. Thanks for attending. Special thanks to our householders. Yeah, have a good evening.